You ever had one of those mornings where the world shows up on your porch with an orange envelope and a smile like it owns your whole life? That was mine. 3 knocks, 2 police cars idling down the road, and an orange notice slapped on my gate. They called the pool unpermitted, said it violated community regulations, and Margot Hale, head of the board, looked at me like I'd stolen something she'd been saving for years. My name is Ethan Cole. My grandfather built this pontoon pool in the late 60s, when the road was dirt and everyone knew each other's last names. He taught me to skip stones and to fix a pump with duct tape and stubbornness. When he died, I patched the plaster, dug up his ledger, and promised, half as ritual and half as pride, to keep it as he kept it simple, private, ours. Margot started with paperwork fines, warnings, the slow bureaucratic squeeze meant to make people cave. When that didn't work, she slipped my pool into a developer's brochure, photoshopping our hill into a glossy sales pitch. A flyer appeared at the diner, renderings of townhomes, my pool right in the center, as if we'd been sitting there on the marketing team's mood board. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it wears a blazer and brings casserole to meetings. Margot had that kind of power. She smiled at potlucks, nodded in agreement at safety talks, and then sent investor emails with my family's photos attached. The line between community standards and taking what's useful is thin, and when someone pushes, it bends. I could have paid the fines. Most people do, because time and money are levers, and the math usually favors whoever wants you to go away. But I couldn't let my grandfather's hands be erased for a laminated brochure. So I started digging county records, old tax receipts, yellowed newspaper clippings. The mailman remembered my grandfather's name. The woman down the street had the original pool tile receipt in a shoebox. Ray, who delivered mail for 30 years, came over and said, "Ethan, folks always look for the easy picture. Real things take more work to see." When the flyer showed up at the diner, the room shifted. Not everyone knows history until someone points it out. The server who'd been a teenager at my grandfather's barbecue held the glossy rendering and said, "They cropped him out." It was a simple thing, but people noticed. A history that fits in a frame feels different when you can see who's missing. When I brought a certified plat to a neighborhood meeting, the room changed again. Margot gave her speech about safety and standards, but people were holding evidence, not the piecemeal complaints she'd circulated, but paper that tracked ownership and history. Her glossy flyer looked different in hands that had known us longer than her term on the board. Margot didn't like the air shifting. She escalated with quiet cruelties: a tow truck at midnight to pull a sign, notices about safety hazards pinned where everyone could see, emails accidentally copied to half the neighborhood with private notes about removing obstructions. Then someone vandalized my mailbox. The escalation feels ridiculous when you list it, but it's the way people try to make a story stick once they've invested in it. One evening she came by the fence and said, "Ethan, we're only asking you to follow the rules. You're making this personal." I remember telling her, "It is personal. It's my family." She smiled like she was explaining a difficult concept to a child and said, "We all make sacrifices for the good of the community." There was a slickness to it, as if her community was a catalog with a price tag. Emma Porter, a friend and property attorney, took the case after she saw the flyer. She's the kind of lawyer who keeps her temper in her back pocket and pulls it out as proof. Emma pulled deeds, cross-referenced plats, and found an ugly pattern. Emails between board members and a development firm, cursor-driven edits that inserted images of my pool into promotional materials, and signed endorsements that implied permission where none had been given. It wasn't a single mistake, it was a plan. Court felt strange. No one's ever told you to picture dusty ledgers and polite voices when you're picturing conflict. But that's what it was: boring paper that was suddenly heavy. Margot's people had a polished story about revitalizing the neighborhood. Emma had the truth in stapled stacks and certified returns. At one hearing, Emma asked an investor rep to project an internal email. The screen lit up, and there it was, a line that read, "Use Cole property image, board approved." The rep stammered. He had to admit the material came from board correspondence. That moment, a sentence on a screen, nothing cinematic, just a digital file, made the whole thing suddenly very plain. The judge's pause before ruling was an odd private thing in a public place. He looked at the stacks on Emma's table, at the glossy brochure now a little damp from coffee, then said we could have a temporary injunction and asked the county to review the board's approvals. Not a knockout, but a stop and see. Enough to halt the marketing machine long enough for the truth to breathe. People reacted in ways you might expect and ways you don't. Some neighbors who'd quietly liked the renderings mailed their regrets, ashamed they'd taken the shiny picture over the stories they grew up with. Others dug in, furious that anything could come between them and a modernization they'd been promised. Margot resigned a week later with a short, formal note, no explanation, just a bow that didn't fit the hand that tied it. Even after the legal win, the aftermath was jagged. A handful of neighbors stopped talking, the online groups filled with debates, and rumor braided itself into truth enough to be convincing to anyone who skimmed. It felt like trimming a tree and finding the rot had spread farther than the trunk. You remove the worst, but the roots still sit in the dirt. The pool stayed. We installed a small plaque with my grandfather's name and a line about private family use, as if ink could secure memory. There are nights I climb the old ladder, sit on the diving board, and watch the light break across the water. The air smells like cut grass and something older, like the liniment my grandfather kept in the shed. Sometimes Margot's face flashes through my memory not as a cartoon villain, but as a person shaped by small ambitions and a hunger to belong to something that felt bigger than her own life. I don't pretend villainy was simple. It was often petty and administrative, dressed in civility. That, maybe more than anything, taught me to pay attention to the ledger of small things. So was it worth it? For the late nights and the petty acts and the worry? I tell you this, protecting what someone labored for, even if it's only a small, cracked pool in a quiet yard, matters because it isn't just wood and plaster, it's a ledger of hands and summers. When a community decides what belongs, history should be considered, not edited to fit a glossy page. This problem isn't just about one yard, it's about how places get smoothed into product, and how memory sometimes needs a person to stand and say, no, not that way. Sometimes these fights aren't about winning or losing, they're about who gets to tell the story. We live in a time when a marketing department can flatten a memory into a postcard, and committees with good intentions can become instruments for someone else's plan. If there's a lesson in this, it's small and stubborn. Keep the receipts. Keep the photographs. Keep talking to the neighbor who remembers, because those small acts are how history resists being polished away. So go ahead, tell me, did I do the right thing? Did Margot have a point about safety and standards? Or did the board cross a line into private enterprise? Drop a comment, share a memory, and if you know someone who's been told to just pay the fine, send them this. Maybe they'll be surprised by how often a shoebox of receipts can change the conversation. The pool is still there. And sometimes, on late summer nights, the water reflects the stars, and I remember why I fought for a ledger that says someone was here.